The medical bay of Station Kepler 9 hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology. But the room at the far end sat in silence. Inside that room, Lyra stood alone, her pale blue skin catching the harsh overhead lights. She stared at her hands, turning them over slowly, as if the answer to her curse might be written on her palms. 3 years had passed since the accident. 3 years since the experimental energy core had ruptured in the science division, bathing her in waves of unknown radiation. The doctors had celebrated her survival. They had called it a miracle. They had no idea what kind of miracle they had created. The first victim had been Dr. Helton, the Vexian physician who had reached out to steady her during a dizzy spell. His three-fingered hand had barely brushed her shoulder before his entire body locked solid. His orange skin had turned gray, then white, spreading from the point of contact like frost across a window. Within seconds, he had become a statue, frozen in time, his expression locked in surprise. He had thawed after 6 hours. The medical team had watched in horror and fascination as the ice slowly receded, as his body returned to its normal temperature, as he gasped back to consciousness with no memory of the time that had passed. Tests showed his cells had entered a state of complete stasis. No aging, no damage, just absolute stillness. Lyra had refused all contact after that. She wore full containment suits when she had to leave her quarters. She ate alone, slept alone, existed alone. The station administration had been understanding at first, then concerned, then frustrated. They wanted their researcher back. They wanted to study her, to understand her, to use her. She had become a weapon they didn't know how to wield. The door chimed. Lyra didn't turn around. "Go away," she said, her voice flat. "That's not very friendly," a voice replied through the intercom. The accent was strange, the words shaped differently than the standard galactic common she was used to. "I'm the new maintenance tech. Name's Riley Chen. Human. And before you tell me to leave again, I should mention there's a coolant leak in your environmental controls. You've got maybe 2 hours before this room becomes uninhabitable." Lyra closed her eyes. Of course the universe would send someone to her sanctuary. "Leave the repair drone. I'll fix it myself." "Yeah, about that. The drone can't reach the damaged section. It's behind a panel that requires manual access. So unless you want to evacuate to a new room, which I'm guessing you don't since you've been in there for 6 months, you're going to have to let me in." 6 months. Had it really been that long since she had allowed anyone to enter? The medication they brought her was passed through an automated delivery slot. Her waste was processed through sealed systems. She had turned her room into a perfect prison. "I can't let you in," Lyra said quietly. "It's not safe." There was a pause. When the human spoke again, the lightness was gone from her voice. "I read your file. I know what happened to Dr. Helton and the others. But I also know that you're slowly going insane in there, and that helping people is what I do. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to fix your environmental system. You're going to stay on the opposite side of the room. I'll be in and out in 20 minutes. Nobody has to touch anybody." Lyra wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to send the human away, to protect her from the curse that lived in Lyra's skin. But the human was right. The isolation was destroying her, piece by piece, day by day. And there was something in that voice, something steady and unafraid, that made her want to believe safety was possible. "Okay," Lyra whispered, "but stay away from me, please." The door opened with a hiss. The human who entered was smaller than Lyra had expected, barely reaching 5.5 feet, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and warm brown skin. She carried a toolkit that looked almost as big as her torso, and she moved with the confident efficiency of someone who had performed this task 1,000 times before. Riley glanced at Lyra, offered a quick smile, and then focused on the wall panel. "Like I said, 20 minutes, just pretend I'm not here." But Lyra couldn't pretend. She watched as the human worked, fascinated by the casual way she moved through the space that had become Lyra's entire world. Riley hummed while she worked, some tune from her homeworld that Lyra didn't recognize. It was the most human sound Lyra had heard in months, and it made something in her chest ache. "Why aren't you afraid?" Lyra asked suddenly. Riley didn't look up from the exposed wiring she was manipulating. "Of what? You? I could kill you, freeze you solid. Everyone else on this station looks at me like I'm a bomb waiting to explode. Can you freeze me from across the room?" "No, it requires physical contact." "Then I'm safe." Riley's voice was matter-of-fact, as if the solution were obvious. "Look, I've worked on 17 different stations and outposts in the past 5 years. I've seen a lot of scared people doing scared things. You're not dangerous, Lyra. You're just hurt." The words hit harder than Lyra expected. She turned away, blinking against the sudden heat in her eyes. "You don't know what it's like to be terrified of your own body, to know that one moment of contact could hurt someone." "You're right. I don't know what that's like." Riley sealed the panel and started packing her tools. "But I know what it's like to be alone, and I know that nobody should have to live like this." She stood, shouldering her toolkit, and started toward the door. Then she paused, turning back to look at Lyra. "I'm going to come by tomorrow to check on the repair, make sure everything's holding, and maybe, if you want, we could talk. Just talk." From opposite sides of the room, Lyra stared at her. "Why would you do that?" Riley shrugged. "Because everybody needs somebody, even people who think they're better off alone." She pressed the door control. "See you tomorrow, Lyra." The door slid shut, and Lyra was alone again. But somehow, the silence felt different now. Less suffocating, less absolute. True to her word, Riley returned the next day, and the day after that. At first, the conversations were brief and practical. Riley would check systems. Lyra would confirm everything was functioning. But slowly the visits grew longer. Riley talked about her life on Earth, about the overcrowded cities and the decision to leave her homeworld for the stars. Lyra found herself sharing memories from before the accident, from when she had been a promising young xenobiologist with a future full of possibilities. "Do you miss it?" Riley asked one day, sitting cross-legged on the floor near the door, while Lyra occupied her usual spot by the window. "Being able to touch things without worrying?" Lyra looked down at her hands. "Every day. I miss handshakes and hugs. I miss brushing past people in corridors. I miss the feeling of connection." She laughed bitterly. "I used to hate crowds. Now I'd give anything to be in one." Riley was quiet for a moment. "Have you tried to control it? The freezing?" "The medical team ran tests for months. There's no control. It's automatic, instantaneous. The moment my bare skin touches living tissue, the reaction begins." "What about non-living things? Can you touch objects?" "Metal, plastic, stone, yes. Anything that was never alive. But wood freezes. Natural fabrics freeze. Anything organic." Riley tilted her head, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Interesting. So it's not about temperature or energy transfer. It's specifically about life." "The doctors theorized that the radiation altered something fundamental in my cellular structure, that I now exist in a different state of quantum probability than other living things. When we make contact, the universe tries to reconcile the difference by putting the other organism into stasis." Lyra shook her head. "But it's all theory. Nobody really understands it." "What if someone could exist in the same state as you?" Riley asked. "What if there was a way to shift another person's cellular structure to match yours?" "That's not possible. The only way that could happen is through the same kind of exposure I experienced. And that was a 1 in a billion accident. Even if we could replicate it, the survival rate would be essentially 0. I only lived because of genetic factors the doctors still don't fully understand." Riley nodded slowly, but Lyra could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. The human was thinking about something, planning something, and it made Lyra nervous. "Don't," Lyra said sharply. "Whatever you're considering, don't. I won't be responsible for another person being hurt because of me." Riley looked up, and her expression was gentle. "I'm not planning anything dangerous, I promise. I'm just thinking about possibilities." She stood, stretching her arms above her head. "I should go. Got 3 more repairs scheduled before shift end. But I'll see you tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," Lyra agreed, and she was surprised by how much she meant it. The routine continued for weeks. Riley's daily visits became the highlight of Lyra's existence, the one thing she looked forward to in the monotonous stretch of her days. They talked about everything and nothing. Riley told stories about her family on Earth, about her mother who had never understood why Riley wanted to leave, and her brother who had supported her choice. Lyra shared her research, her passion for understanding the biological diversity of the galaxy, her dreams of cataloging new species on uncharted worlds. "You should do it," Riley said one evening. "Once we figure this out, you should go back to fieldwork." "If we figure this out," Lyra corrected, "and that's a big if." "When," Riley insisted. "When we figure this out. I don't do ifs. They're too uncertain." Lyra smiled despite herself. The human's optimism was infectious, a bright spot in the darkness that had consumed her life. She was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. That was when everything changed. Riley arrived for her visit, but instead of her usual maintenance uniform, she wore a simple shirt and pants, and she wasn't carrying any tools. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, confused. Riley took a deep breath. "I've been doing research, talking to some scientists I know from my academy days. Humans have this thing called the mammalian dive reflex. When we're exposed to extreme cold, our bodies can shut down non-essential functions to preserve core systems. It's a survival mechanism that's kept people alive in freezing water for hours." "Riley, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that human biology is weird. We're adaptation machines. Our bodies are constantly making tiny adjustments to deal with whatever environment we're in. And I'm talking about the fact that I've been thinking about your condition nonstop for weeks, and I need to know if my theory is right." Lyra's blood ran cold. "No, absolutely not. Just listen." "No!" Lyra stood, backing away even though Riley was already across the room. "I know what you're thinking, and the answer is no. I won't let you risk yourself. I can't." Riley's expression was calm, determined. "It's not your choice to make, it's mine, and I've made it. You'll freeze. You'll end up like Dr. Helton, trapped in stasis, and it will be my fault." "Maybe," Riley acknowledged. "Or maybe human biology is different enough that your condition won't affect me the same way. Maybe our ability to adapt to extreme conditions will protect me. We won't know unless we try. The risk is too great. The risk of you spending the rest of your life in isolation is greater." Riley took a step forward, and Lyra's heart hammered in her chest. "I've seen what this is doing to you, Lyra. I've watched you fade a little more each day. This isn't living, this is just existing. And I refuse to let you keep doing this to yourself when there's a chance I can help." Tears were streaming down Lyra's face now. "Please don't do this, please. I can't lose you. You're the only friend I have." "Then let me be your friend in the way that matters." Riley extended her hand, palm up, an offering and a challenge. "Let me try." Every fiber of Lyra's being screamed at her to refuse, to order Riley out of the room, to maintain the safety of distance. But she looked into the human's eyes and saw something she hadn't seen in 3 years. She saw hope. Not the false hope of doctors promising cures they couldn't deliver, but the real, raw hope of someone willing to risk everything for connection. "If this goes wrong," Lyra's voice broke, "then I'll thaw just like the others did, and we'll know. But if it goes right, if I'm right about human adaptation, then you get your life back. You get to touch the world again. Isn't that worth the risk?" Lyra's hands were shaking. She held them close to her body, terrified of what they might do. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." "Yes, you are," Riley said softly. "You've survived 3 years of the hardest thing I can imagine. You're the strongest person I know. Now let me help you take the next step." The room felt too small and too large at the same time. Lyra's mind raced through every possible outcome, every disaster scenario, every way this could end in tragedy. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A desperate, hungry need for human connection that she had suppressed for so long it had become a physical ache. Slowly, hands still trembling, Lyra raised her arm. Her fingers stretched toward Riley's waiting palm, moving through the space between them like crossing an impossible distance. "Together," Riley whispered, "on three. 1, 2, 3. Their hands met, skin touching skin for the first time in 3 years, and Lyra's world exploded into sensation. She felt the warmth of Riley's palm, the slight roughness of calluses earned through years of maintenance work, the firm grip of fingers wrapping around her own. She felt connection, real and solid and utterly human. And Riley didn't freeze. The human skin didn't turn gray or white. No ice spread from the point of contact. Riley's hand remained warm and alive, her pulse beating steadily beneath Lyra's fingertips. They stood frozen in a different way, both of them staring at their joined hands in disbelief. "How?" Lyra breathed. Riley laughed, the sound bright with relief and wonder. "I told you, human biology is weird. We adapt." Her fingers tightened around Lyra's. "We survive. We find ways to exist in environments that should kill us. It's what we do. It's what makes us human." Lyra couldn't speak. The feeling of another person's touch, the simple miracle of contact, overwhelmed every other thought. She had dreamed of this moment, had convinced herself it would never happen, and now it was real. Riley was real, solid and warm, and very much not frozen. "Thank you," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being crazy enough to try." "That's what friends are for," Riley replied, smiling. "Being crazy together." They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, both of them processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Outside the window, the station continued its endless rotation, indifferent to the small miracle occurring in the isolated room. But for Lyra, everything had changed. The prison walls hadn't moved, but they no longer felt quite so impenetrable. Riley squeezed her hand gently. "So, what do you want to do first? Now that you know at least one person in the galaxy can touch you without consequences." Lyra thought about all the things she had missed, all the experiences she had lost, and she realized that in this moment, she didn't need any of them. She had this. She had Riley's hand in hers, warm and alive, and proof that impossible things could happen. "This," she said simply, "I just want to do this." And so they did, standing together in the quiet room while the universe spun on around them. Two unlikely friends holding on to hope and each other, proving that sometimes the most human thing of all was refusing to accept that some things were impossible. Because humanity had built itself on the foundation of defying odds, and Riley Chen was no exception to that rule. She was exactly what her species had always been, stubborn, optimistic, and absolutely determined to help, no matter the cost. The news of Riley's immunity spread through Station Kepler 9 like electricity through circuits. Within hours, the medical bay was buzzing with activity as doctors and researchers scrambled to understand what had happened. Lyra found herself subjected to a battery of new tests, Riley beside her for each one, their hands clasped together as if to prove repeatedly that the impossible was indeed possible. Dr. Shallon, a Karathi physician with silver scales and 4 eyes, studied the readouts with an expression of bewilderment. "There's no change in your cellular structure," she said to Lyra. "The quantum variance that causes the freezing effect is still present, and yet, Contact with the human produces no stasis reaction. It's as if her biology simply refuses to acknowledge the incompatibility. Riley shrugged, looking remarkably unconcerned for someone who had just become a medical anomaly. Humans are good at refusing to acknowledge things. It's practically our superpower. This isn't a joke, Dr. Shallon said sternly. We need to understand the mechanism. If human physiology possesses some inherent protection against stasis effects, it could have enormous implications for medical science, for cryogenic storage, for deep space travel. Then study away, Riley replied, but maybe do it in a way that doesn't make Lyra feel like a lab specimen. She's had enough of being locked in a room and stared at. Lyra felt a surge of gratitude for the human's protectiveness. For so long, she had been nothing more than a problem to be solved, a danger to be contained. Riley was the first person in 3 years to treat her like she was still a person who mattered beyond her condition. The tests continued for days. Blood samples, tissue scans, electromagnetic resonance imaging, quantum probability mapping. The researchers were thorough, and Riley submitted to each examination with patient good humor, making jokes that kept Lyra from drowning in the clinical atmosphere that had defined so much of her recent existence. "You know what's funny?" Riley said during one particularly long scanning session. "I spend most of my time fixing things that are broken. Pipes, circuits, environmental systems. But I never expected to be the thing that wasn't broken when everything else should have been." "You're not a thing," Lyra said quietly. "You're a miracle." Riley turned her head, meeting Lyra's gaze. "We're both miracles. You survived something that should have killed you. I can touch you when I should freeze. Maybe the universe just decided we were meant to find each other." The romantic notion made Lyra's chest tight. She had been careful not to examine too closely what she felt for Riley, afraid that naming it might make it too real, too complicated. But there was no denying the connection between them, the way Riley's presence had become essential to her existence. Dr. Shallon entered the scanning room with a data pad, her expression troubled. "We've completed the initial analysis. The results are inconsistent with our current understanding of quantum biology." "Meaning what?" Riley asked. "Meaning that by all logical models, you should have frozen the moment you touched Lyra. The quantum variance in her cells should have forced your biological systems into stasis. But instead, your cells appear to be operating in multiple quantum states simultaneously, adapting in real time to match Lyra's frequency while maintaining your own life processes." The doctor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep confusion in her species. "It's theoretically impossible, yet here you are." "I'm getting really tired of people telling me what should be impossible," Riley said. "Humans left Earth when everyone said faster-than-light travel couldn't work. We survived in environments that weren't designed for our biology. We adapt. That's literally our whole thing. But adaptation occurs over generations, through evolutionary processes. What you're doing is instantaneous cellular recalibration. It suggests that human biology has some kind of built-in quantum flexibility that we've never documented before." Lyra leaned forward. "What are you saying? That all humans might be immune to my condition?" Dr. Shallon shook her head. "We don't know. Riley's physiology shows some unique markers, particular genetic expressions that might contribute to her immunity. But without testing more humans, we can't determine if this is a species-wide trait or an individual variation." The implications were staggering. If Riley's immunity was unique to her, then Lyra's connection to the wider world remained limited to a single point of contact. But if other humans shared the trait, if humanity as a whole possessed this strange quantum flexibility, then everything changed. "We need to find other humans on the station," Lyra said. "We need to test this properly." Riley held up a hand. "Wait, let's think about this carefully. I volunteered to take a risk because it was my choice. We can't just start asking people to touch you without fully explaining the danger. But if they're immune, that's a big if. And even if humans generally have some resistance, there might be variation. Some might freeze partially. Some might have delayed reactions. We don't know enough yet. Riley's expression was serious. I won't let you risk hurting someone because we got excited about one positive result. Dr. Shallon nodded approvingly. The human is correct. We need a controlled testing environment with full medical support and informed consent from any participants. I'll begin preparing protocols and reaching out to the human crew members on station. Over the next week, a small group of human volunteers was assembled. There were 5 of them in total: 2 engineers, a cargo specialist, a botanist, and a young communications officer fresh from Earth. They gathered in a specially prepared medical bay, each of them briefed on the risks and the potential outcomes. Lyra stood before them, feeling more vulnerable than she had in years. These people were willing to risk themselves for her, to test whether Riley's immunity was a miracle or a pattern. The weight of their trust was almost unbearable. Thank you, she said, her voice unsteady. All of you, you have no idea what this means to me. The cargo specialist, a stocky man named James with laugh lines around his eyes, grinned. Are you kidding? This is the most exciting thing that's happened on this station in months. Plus, Riley promised us all free drinks if we survive, so we're pretty motivated. The nervous laughter that followed broke some of the tension. Riley stood beside Lyra, her hand ready to grab Lyra if anything went wrong, her presence a steady anchor in the uncertainty. Dr. Shallon directed each volunteer to approach one at a time. The first was James, who stepped forward with exaggerated bravery, holding out his hand like a knight accepting a challenge. For science, he declared. Lyra reached out slowly, her fingers trembling. When their hands met, she felt the same warmth she had experienced with Riley, the same absence of the freezing reaction. James's skin remained its normal, tan color, his expression shifting from theatrical courage to genuine amazement. Holy shit, he breathed. It actually works. One by one, the volunteers made contact. The botanist, a quiet woman named Elena, held Lyra's hand and cried, overwhelmed by the simple beauty of the moment. The communications officer, barely 20 years old, laughed with delight. Each touch was a revelation, a confirmation that Riley's immunity wasn't unique to her, but part of something fundamental about human biology. By the time all 5 volunteers had successfully made contact without freezing, the medical bay was filled with an electric excitement. Dr. Shallon was frantically recording data, her multiple eyes darting between screens and sensors. The humans were celebrating, hugging each other and chattering about the implications. Riley pulled Lyra aside, away from the commotion. How are you feeling? Lyra looked at her hands, the same hands that had been weapons for 3 years, now proven capable of safe contact again, at least with humans. I don't know. Relieved, terrified, grateful, all of it at once. That's reasonable, Riley said softly. This is huge. Your whole world just changed. Because of you, you made this possible. Riley shook her head. I just offered my hand. You were brave enough to take it. That was all you. Before Lyra could respond, Dr. Shallon approached, her scales shimmering with excitement. This is remarkable, truly remarkable. We need to publish these findings, begin broader studies across the human population. If this quantum flexibility is a species-wide trait, it has implications far beyond your personal situation. Lyra felt a flicker of unease. What do you mean? I mean that humans might be uniquely suited for interaction with quantum variant organisms, with exotic energy forms, with phenomena that put other species at risk. They could become intermediaries in first contact situations with beings we previously considered too dangerous to approach. The doctor's enthusiasm was palpable. This could redefine humanity's role in the galactic community. Riley's expression had gone carefully neutral, a look Lyra had learned meant the human was thinking through implications. That's a lot to put on one species based on a limited test sample. But the potential is there, Riley agreed. but so is the potential for exploitation, for humans being pushed into dangerous situations because we're apparently harder to kill than everyone expected. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Dr. Shallon looked taken aback but nodded slowly. You raise valid concerns. We'll proceed carefully. For now, let's focus on understanding the mechanism and determining the full scope of human immunity to quantum variance effects. As the doctor moved away to continue her work, Lyra turned to Riley. You're worried. I'm cautious, Riley corrected. This is great news for you, and I'm thrilled about that. But I've seen how the galaxy treats humans. We're useful, we're adaptable, we're willing to take risks other species won't. That can be good, but it can also mean we end up being the ones sent into every dangerous situation because we're considered expendable. I would never see you that way. I know you wouldn't, but not everyone thinks like you. Riley sighed, running a hand through her hair. I'm sorry, I don't want to dampen this moment. You deserve to celebrate. You can touch people again, at least human people. That's incredible. Lyra took Riley's hand, the gesture now familiar but no less meaningful. It's incredible because you made it possible, because you were willing to risk yourself when no one else was. I won't forget that. Ever. They stood together in the busy medical bay, surrounded by the noise of scientific discovery and human celebration. Two people connected by an impossible twist of biology and fate. For Lyra, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to reclaim pieces of the life she had lost. But she was also aware that this discovery had opened doors that led to unknown places, possibilities both wonderful and concerning. Over the following weeks, the research continued. More human crew members volunteered for testing, and the results remained consistent. Every human who made contact with Lyra remained unfrozen, their biology adapting in real time to accommodate her quantum variance. The scientific community was fascinated, and papers began circulating through academic channels across the galaxy. But for Lyra, the most important change was simpler and more profound. She was no longer alone. The human crew members of Station Kepler-9 had adopted her as one of their own, inviting her to meals in the cafeteria, to game nights in the recreation areas, to casual conversations in the corridors. For the first time in 3 years, she could shake hands, pat shoulders, exist in physical proximity to other beings without fear. Riley remained her closest companion, the person who had first broken through her isolation and continued to anchor her as she navigated this new reality. They spent hours together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence, their hands linked in a connection that had become as natural as breathing. One evening, they sat together in the station's observation deck, watching the stars wheel past the viewport. The deck was empty except for them, a rare moment of privacy in the busy station. I've been thinking, Riley said quietly, about what you said before, about wanting to return to fieldwork, to xenobiology research. Lyra nodded. It feels possible now, like maybe I could have that life again. You could, but there's a complication. Riley turned to face her. Most research teams are multi-species, and while you can safely interact with humans now, we don't know about other species. The non-human crew members on this station still give you a wide berth because they don't know if contact would freeze them. It was a reality Lyra had been trying not to think about too hard. Yes, she could interact with humans without danger, but humans made up only a small percentage of the galactic community. Most of the species she would encounter in field research remained potential victims of her condition. Dr. Shallon has been working on containment suits, Lyra said, advanced ones that would allow me to work alongside non-human colleagues safely. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Or, Riley said slowly, you could focus on research that primarily involves human teams. There are plenty of human-led expeditions that would jump at the chance to have an experienced xenobiologist, some that specifically explore environments too dangerous for other species. Because humans are apparently too stubborn to freeze properly? Riley grinned. Exactly. We're the galaxy's cockroaches. We survive things we shouldn't. Might as well make use of it. The idea had merit, but it also felt like accepting limitations, like allowing her condition to define her choices. Lyra had spent 3 years having her life shaped by what she couldn't do. She wasn't eager to continue that pattern. I don't want to limit myself to only working with humans, she said carefully. Not because I don't value humans, but because I became a xenobiologist to study all forms of life. To restrict myself to one species feels like giving up. Riley squeezed her hand. Then don't give up. We'll figure it out. Better containment suits, more research into your condition, maybe even finding a way to suppress or control the quantum variance. There are options. You don't have to settle for less than what you want. You make everything sound so possible. That's because it is, Riley said simply. I grew up on a planet where humans weren't supposed to survive. Our atmosphere was wrong. Our gravity was crushing. Our star burned too hot. Earth was a terrible place for us, and we thrived anyway. We left that terrible place and spread across the stars, into environments even worse. Possible and impossible are just words. What matters is whether you're willing to try. Lyra leaned her head against Riley's shoulder, a gesture of casual affection that still felt miraculous after years of isolation. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise, I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a while, watching the universe spin past the viewport. Lyra thought about the future, about the paths opening before her, about the challenges that remained. Her condition hadn't gone away. She was still a person whose touch could freeze most living beings. But she was no longer alone with that burden. She had Riley, and through Riley, she had found a connection to humanity. A species whose biology had proven more flexible than anyone had imagined. I want to try something, Lyra said suddenly. Riley lifted her head. What kind of something? I want to touch someone who isn't human. With proper medical supervision and consent, of course, but I need to know if my fear is based on reality or just habit. Maybe 3 years of isolation made me more afraid than I need to be. That's a big step. I know, but I can't move forward if I'm still trapped by fear of what might happen. Riley was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Okay, let's talk to Dr. Shallon. Set up a controlled test with a volunteer from another species, but promise me you'll be careful. And promise me that if it doesn't go well, you won't blame yourself. You're not responsible for your condition. The accident was not your fault. I promise to try not to blame myself, Lyra said. That's the best I can offer. I'll take it. They returned to the medical bay the next day, where Dr. Shallon received Lyra's request with cautious interest. The Korathi physician understood the importance of the test, both for Lyra's peace of mind and for scientific understanding of her condition. We'll need a volunteer from a species with robust recovery abilities, Dr. Shallon said. Someone whose biology can handle stasis without significant risk. I'm thinking a Tarlaxian. Their regenerative abilities are exceptional, and they have experience with suspended animation in their natural life cycle. A Tarlaxian named Korak volunteered. He was a security officer with deep purple skin and bioluminescent patterns that shifted across his body like living art. He met with Lyra in a medical bay configured for emergency intervention. Dr. Shallon and Riley both present as support. I understand the risks, Korak said, his voice a melodic rumble, and I am willing to proceed. Your isolation has gone on long enough, researcher Lyra. If I can help end it, that is a worthwhile purpose. Lyra's hands were shaking. Riley stood beside her, close enough to touch, but not interfering, letting Lyra face this moment on her own terms. Thank you, Lyra said to Korak. Your courage means everything. She extended her hand slowly, giving him time to reconsider. Korak met her halfway, his 3-fingered appendage steady and calm. The moment their skin made contact, Lyra felt the familiar surge of her condition activating. Korak's purple skin bleached to white, spreading from the point of contact up his arm. His bioluminescent patterns flickered and died. Within seconds, he was a statue, frozen in place with his hands still extended. Lyra jerked back, horror flooding through her. It hadn't worked. Her condition was still deadly to non-humans. The hope that maybe, somehow, something had changed in her collapsed under the weight of reality. "He's stable," Dr. Shallon said, monitoring Korak's vital signs. "Cellular stasis is complete but controlled. We'll let him thaw naturally and monitor the process." Riley's arm wrapped around Lyra's shoulders. "It's okay. We knew this was possible. It doesn't change anything." But it did change things. It confirmed that Lyra's condition was still dangerous, still a barrier between her and most of the galaxy. Yes, she could interact safely with humans, but humanity was a small part of the galactic community. Most beings remained off-limits to her touch. They waited for 90 minutes before Korak began to thaw. The white gradually receded from his skin, color returning in waves. His bioluminescent patterns flickered back to life. When he finally gasped and stumbled, both Lyra and Riley rushed forward to steady him. "How do you feel?" Dr. Shallon asked, her scanners already working. Korak blinked slowly, orienting himself. Disoriented, but undamaged. It was like falling asleep instantly, then waking with no sense of time passed. He looked at Lyra, and his expression was kind. "Do not despair, researcher. You gave me a unique experience. Few beings can say they have experienced true stasis. It was not unpleasant." His compassion made Lyra want to cry. Even after freezing him, after turning him into a statue, Korak was trying to make her feel better. The kindness of strangers in the face of her curse was almost harder to bear than isolation had been. Riley guided her out of the medical bay, away from the tests and the monitors, and the reminder of what she still couldn't do. They found an empty storage room and sat on the floor together, Lyra's head on Riley's shoulder. "I thought maybe things had changed," Lyra whispered, "that somehow the quantum variance had shifted." "Things have changed," Riley insisted. "You're not alone anymore. You have people who care about you. That's huge. But I'm still dangerous. To most species, yes, but not to humans. And humans are pretty great, if I do say so myself." Riley's tone was light, but her arm tightened around Lyra. "You wanted to know the truth. Now you do. Your condition is still active for non-humans. That's important information. It means you can plan accordingly, take proper precautions, make informed choices. It means I'm still limited. We're all limited. I can't breathe underwater. I can't survive in hard vacuum. I can't even digest certain proteins that other species eat without thinking. Limitations are just part of existing." Riley pulled back to look Lyra in the eyes. "But limitations don't define us. What defines us is what we do with the freedom we have." Lyra wanted to believe that. She wanted to embrace the positive, to focus on what she had gained rather than what remained out of reach. But the disappointment was still fresh. The hope that had briefly flared now reduced to embers. "Give yourself time to feel this," Riley said gently. "You're allowed to be disappointed, but don't let disappointment become despair. You've come so far. Don't stop now." They sat together in the quiet storage room until Lyra felt steady enough to face the world again. When they emerged, word of the test had already spread through the station. Non-human crew members who had been cautiously curious about Lyra's progress now knew for certain that she remained dangerous to them. Some looked at her with pity, others with fear, a few with fascination. But the human crew members rallied around her. They made a point of seeking her out, of including her in activities, of demonstrating that she was valued and welcomed, regardless of her limitations. Their support was a lifeline, proof that she could still have connections, still have community, even if that community was limited to one species. Dr. Shallon continued her research, determined to understand the mechanism that made humans immune. The working theory was that human cellular structure possessed an unusual degree of quantum flexibility, a legacy of their evolution on a planet with variable radiation exposure and dramatic environmental shifts. Humans had adapted to survive in unstable conditions, and that adaptability extended to the quantum level. Your species is biologically anomalous in several ways, Dr. Shallon explained during one of their regular consultations. Your ability to consume and derive nutrition from such a wide variety of organic compounds, your tolerance for gravity variations, your psychological resilience to isolation and stress. Humans are generalists in a galaxy of specialists. That generalist nature apparently includes quantum state adaptability. So we're weird, Riley summarized. We already knew that. Weird, yes, but advantageously so in this instance. The doctor turned to Lyra. I'm recommending that you consider transitioning to a human-majority research team. Not because you're limited, but because your unique situation combined with human quantum flexibility creates interesting possibilities. There are phenomena we've been unable to study safely because they induce stasis in most observers. You could theoretically interact with such phenomena without risk, with human team members serving as support. It was an intriguing proposal. Instead of seeing her condition as a limitation, Dr. Shallon was reframing it as a specialized tool. Lyra could study things that froze other researchers. She could interact with quantum-variant organisms safely, with humans as her connection to the wider team. What kind of phenomena are we talking about? Lyra asked. Dr. Shallon pulled up star charts and data files. There's a region in the Vex sector where quantum fluctuations are so extreme that exploration teams lose consciousness within minutes. We've only been able to study it via remote probes, but you might be able to withstand the exposure. There's also several species we've classified as untouchable because contact with them induces immediate stasis. You could potentially communicate with them. The possibilities were dizzying. What had seemed like a curse suddenly looked like a unique advantage. Lyra could go places and study things that were off-limits to other researchers. She could expand xenobiological knowledge in ways no one else could. I would need a support team, Lyra said slowly. People I trust. Riley grinned. I know a maintenance tech who's pretty good at keeping things running in hostile environments. I bet she'd sign up. I bet she would, Lyra agreed, her heart lightening. Maybe this wasn't the future she had imagined before the accident, but it was a future full of purpose and possibility, and the chance to contribute something meaningful to galactic knowledge. And it was a future where she wouldn't be alone. They began planning the next phase immediately. Dr. Shallon reached out to research institutions known for exploring dangerous phenomena. Riley started networking with human crew members who might be interested in joining an expedition team. Lyra compiled lists of quantum-variant organisms and environments that had been categorized as too dangerous for conventional study. Within 3 months, they had assembled a team, 5 humans with various specializations: engineering, medical support, field analysis, communications, and security. All of them were experienced with high-risk environments, and all of them were enthusiastic about the unique nature of the mission. They would be the first dedicated team designed to explore phenomena that induced stasis, protected by their species' innate quantum flexibility and supported by Lyra's expertise. The Galactic Research Council approved their proposal with cautious interest. They were given a small, well-equipped ship and a mandate to document their findings carefully. The mission was experimental, a test case for whether this unusual combination of human biology and quantum variant research could produce valuable results. The day they departed Station Kepler 9, Lyra stood on the boarding ramp and looked back at the place that had been her prison for so long. She had entered as someone broken and alone, convinced her life was over. She was leaving as someone with purpose, with friends, with a future that stretched toward the unknown. Riley stood beside her, their hands linked in the familiar connection that had started everything. Ready for this? Lyra thought about all the impossible things that had already happened. She had survived the accident. Riley had proven immune. They had built a team and a mission from the ruins of tragedy. Impossible was just another word for not yet achieved. "I'm ready," she said. They boarded the ship together and Lyra didn't look back again. Behind her was isolation and fear, and 3 years of slowly dying inside. Ahead was discovery, adventure, and the vast, unknown galaxy waiting to be explored. She was still the woman whose touch could freeze the universe. But now, with humans beside her, defying impossible odds, she was also the woman who refused to let that define her. The ship lifted from the dock, and Lyra felt the familiar pull of engines engaging, carrying them away from known space toward their first destination. The rest of the team was running pre-flight checks, securing equipment, preparing for the work ahead. But Lyra stayed at the viewport with Riley, watching the station shrink behind them. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for taking that first risk, for not giving up on me." Riley smiled, her expression warm and full of the stubborn optimism that had changed Lyra's life. "I told you from the start, nobody should have to live alone. And humans are really, really good at being stubborn about helping people, even when it's impossible." She squeezed Lyra's hand. "Especially when it's impossible. That's when we're at our best." The stars stretched out before them, infinite and full of mysteries waiting to be solved. And Lyra, who had thought her story was over, realized it was only just beginning. She was the woman who froze everyone she touched, except the humans who defied impossible odds. And together, they were going to explore the untouchable places of the universe and prove that impossible was just another challenge waiting to be overcome. Their first destination appeared on the navigation display, the Vex Sector Anomaly, a region where quantum fluctuations had prevented all previous exploration attempts. The rest of the crew gathered around as the ship entered the approach vector, preparing for their first real test as a team. The anomaly was beautiful from a distance, a swirling vortex of colors that shouldn't exist together, a place where the normal rules of physics took a break. As they drew closer, Lyra felt a tingling sensation across her skin, her cells recognizing the quantum instability and responding to it. "How are you feeling?" Riley asked, monitoring Lyra's vital signs. "Strange, like my body is vibrating at a frequency that isn't quite synchronized with the rest of reality." Lyra flexed her hands, watching the way the light seemed to bend around her fingers. "But I'm functional. I'm not losing consciousness." The rest of the team was reporting similar sensations, but milder. The humans were adapting to the quantum fluctuations, their flexible biology adjusting in real time. They were uncomfortable, but stable, able to continue working where other species would have already succumbed to stasis. "We're entering the outer boundary," announced Davis, their pilot. "Holding steady, all systems nominal." They pushed deeper into the anomaly, instruments recording data at rates that would have been impossible for remote probes. Lyra stood at the science station, cataloging the quantum variance patterns, identifying structures and rhythms in what had previously appeared to be random chaos. The anomaly wasn't random at all. It was following rules, just rules that operated on a level most species couldn't perceive without falling into stasis. Hours passed as they worked, the team moving with practiced coordination. Riley kept monitoring everyone's vitals, making sure the quantum exposure wasn't causing delayed harm. Elena, their botanist turned field analyst, was documenting the visual phenomena with instruments designed to capture data beyond normal electromagnetic spectrum. James handled communications with the base stations, relaying their findings in real time. When they finally withdrew from the anomaly, exhausted but exhilarated, they had collected more data in one mission than decades of remote observation had provided. The Galactic Research Council's cautious experiment had just proven spectacularly successful. "That was incredible," Elena breathed, reviewing the data. "We actually survived inside a quantum fluctuation field. Do you know how many research teams have died trying to do exactly that?" "7," Riley said quietly. 7 teams, 43 individuals, all dead because the stasis was permanent, not temporary. because they weren't human and they weren't with someone like Lyra. The weight of those numbers settled over the crew. They had succeeded where others had failed, not because they were better or smarter, but because their biology happened to be compatible with an environment that was lethal to most species. It was humbling and inspiring in equal measure. "We should honor them," Lyra said. "The researchers who died trying to study places like this. Their sacrifice led to our success. We're standing on their shoulders." They held a brief ceremony in the ship's common area, speaking the names of the fallen researchers, acknowledged the debt they owed to those who had tried and failed before them. It grounded their success in perspective, reminded them that their unique advantages came with responsibilities. Over the following months, they tackled one impossible environment after another. They studied organisms that induced stasis in observers, documented quantum phenomena that existed in states of probability rather than certainty, explored regions of space where the normal laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules. Each mission expanded xenobiological knowledge in ways that had previously been impossible. The Galactic Research Council, initially skeptical, became enthusiastic supporters. Funding increased. Other human researchers expressed interest in joining similar teams. Lyra's condition, once a curse that had isolated her, had become the key to an entirely new field of study. But for Lyra herself, the most important change was simpler. She woke each morning surrounded by friends. She worked alongside people who valued her contributions. She could touch Riley's hand whenever she wanted, a small miracle that never stopped being meaningful. She had found a way to exist in the galaxy, not despite her condition, but because of it. Her unique biology combined with human adaptability, creating possibilities no one had imagined. One evening after a particularly successful mission studying a quantum-variant jellyfish species, Riley found Lyra at the viewport, watching the stars. "You look contemplative," Riley observed, settling beside her. "I was thinking about how different my life is now compared to 3 years ago. How much has changed." "Better or worse?" Lyra turned to look at her friend, her partner in exploration, the person who had risked everything on a theory and changed Lyra's entire existence. "Infinitely better. I went from thinking my life was over to doing work that matters, with people I care about. It's not the future I planned, but it's a future I love." Riley smiled. "Good, because I was thinking we should propose an even crazier mission next. There's a nebula in the Hadron Cluster that's supposed to be absolutely lethal to observers. Quantum variance off the charts. Perfect for us." "Absolutely lethal?" "Probably lethal. Possibly lethal. The reports are unclear." Riley's grin was infectious. "So, are you interested?" Lyra laughed, the sound coming easily now, no longer trapped behind walls of isolation and fear. "Of course I'm interested. When have we ever let probably lethal stop us?" They sat together at the viewport, planning their next impossible mission. Two unlikely friends who had found each other across the gap between species and circumstances. Lyra was still the woman whose touch could freeze the universe. But she was also the woman who explored the unexplorable, who turned a curse into a career, who proved that impossible was just another word for difficult. And beside her was Riley Chen, human, stubborn, optimistic, who had looked at impossible odds and decided to reach out her hand anyway. Because that's what humans did. They adapted. They persisted. They refused to accept that some things couldn't be done. Together they defied impossible odds one mission at a time, exploring the universe in ways no one had thought possible, proving that sometimes the greatest discoveries came from the most unlikely combinations. A woman who froze everything she touched, and a species too stubborn to freeze properly, changing xenobiology one impossible environment at a time. The galaxy had thought Lyra's condition made her untouchable, unusable, a tragedy without resolution. But the galaxy had underestimated humanity's capacity for adaptation and Lyra's capacity for resilience. Together they had transformed isolation into innovation, curse into capability, impossible into inevitable. The stars wheeled past the viewport, infinite and mysterious, full of quantum anomalies and strange organisms and phenomena that would freeze most observers in their tracks. But not them, never them. They would keep exploring, keep discovering, keep proving that impossible was just the beginning of the story, not the end. Lyra squeezed Riley's hand, feeling the warmth and life in that simple contact, the miracle that had started everything, the touch that should have frozen but didn't, the moment that had changed both their lives and opened up entire new branches of science. "Thank you," Lyra said again, because some things needed to be said more than once. "For being impossible." Riley laughed. "Right back at you. Now let's go be impossible together at the Hadron Cluster. I hear the nebula there is absolutely beautiful, in addition to being potentially lethal." "Potentially lethal is my favorite kind of beautiful," Lyra replied. And together, the woman who froze worlds and the human who refused to freeze, they turned toward their next adventure, ready to defy impossible odds once more. Because that's what they did. That's what they were. That's what humanity had always been, and what Lyra had learned to become alongside them. The universe was vast and dangerous, and full of places that killed observers. But it had never met a team quite like theirs, had never faced the combination of quantum variance and human stubbornness working in concert. The impossible didn't stand a chance. Their ship turned toward the Hadron Cluster, engines burning bright against the darkness, carrying them toward the next beautiful, lethal, impossible discovery. And in that moment, racing toward the unknown with friends beside her and purpose driving her forward, Lyra had never felt more alive. The woman who had spent 3 years frozen in isolation had finally thawed, not because her condition had changed, but because she had found people who matched her frequency, who could stand in the quantum variance of her existence without freezing. She had found humans, those strange, adaptable, impossible creatures who refused to accept limitations as final. And together, they were rewriting the rules of what was possible, one frozen anomaly at a time.